All right, so we have John Linney here. I'm very excited to have you. And I pressed the button, John, so we're live.
Great.
We've been talking for a while off the microphone, but now we can talk on it. How about
Good. I'll start censoring myself now.
that? Fair enough. So, but one of the main goals that I've had to have this podcast, once I found out who you were, was so that I can pick your brain about podcasting.
Hmm.
So
Well,
we had like most people I get on the podcast, we connected through Twitter, but in a sort of indirect, interesting way. In that on National Podcast Day or International Podcast Day, you were recommended to me to listen to and to check out, and so I did that and reached out and excitingly, you were interested in talking. So here we are.
yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited about chatting, and I don't know how much I can offer around podcasting, but I know that school climate is something that got me so engaged in podcasting because I've worked with a lot of schools in the last 14 years or so, and I've got to work with schools all over the U.S. and Puerto Rico and Canada and Mexico and Northern Ireland. I got to do some piecework there in Northern Ireland with students, and one of the things that I find about educators is just that the heart and the commitment that it takes to be an educator and to stay in the game and to continually learn things and the amazing stuff I've been able to see at these over kind of 400 schools I've worked in, just wanting to share that with people, wanting to make sure that people could access all of that. I mean, this huge repository of knowledge and practices that are just out there available that sometimes people feel like they're on an island and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to fix things. They don't know how to improve
It's crazy how
schools.
much we're not, right? Like I can't get over like on Twitter. My best guess. So this is just my best guess. I think there are about 70,000 teachers on Twitter.
Mm, wow.
And what does that represent? Is that even one per school out there?
Yes, that's a good question, percentage wise. And of that percentage, how many are using it regularly or meaningfully and actually tapping into the power that it has?
Right.
And
And if that's a fraction of the percentage, even at a fraction of the percentage, that number of people regularly astound me. Right. I
yeah,
go on every day and I see these crazy pictures and lesson plans and all sorts of things. We're doing amazing stuff, and it's only a fraction of people that are actually out there.
that's right. Yeah, it's amazing to see all of that is there. And I know it can be a little overwhelming. You have hashtag NT2T, which is new teacher to Twitter, and many teachers are learning how to use that hashtag. And I know that when we see all that stuff, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. It's like that whole drinking from a hose kind of analogy. It's like, where do I start? Where do I go? And you can refine that, obviously, we know through hashtag searches and things like that. And in podcasts, I mean, there's something like over 500,000 podcasts out there now. So how do you discern and find, your podcast and my podcast, and how do we start to collect that information? So I think that's a challenge, obviously, given that we've got this big library. But at the same time, the library now exists, whereas before, when it came to, for me and my working with schools, it was hard to, like, how do I share that? How do I get that out to people through a one at a time, professional development session where I do, a half day or a full day for a school or a district? How do we start to get those practices out there? How do we get meaningful stuff so that people feel like, okay, it's something I can use, rather than too many complaints that you probably hear too, is that professional development it wasn't valuable or it was a waste of my time. And so I feel like, okay, now there's no more excuses. Like, if you want professional development, it's there. It's on Twitter, it's online, if you Google stuff, you can go to many podcasts. I mean, I feel like my podcasts, and yours too, is like personalized professional development. If I want to know
Way
more
more
about
than I
something,
thought it was going to be. Like
yeah.
I wasn't really sure. I kind of started with one concept, this idea of like, I was like, I'm going to do a few conversations about innovation, see if we can figure out what that means, because I kept hearing that buzzword and nobody really knew what they meant. They were just saying it, and so I was like, all right, we'll do that. And then what it ended up being was this like rich set of conversations that was awesome professional development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I feel too. And I when I'm interviewing people, I'm getting developed myself and I'm learning things and I'm finding resources I didn't know about. So it's enriching for me personally. And at the same time, I feel like it's something that is a what you're doing and the podcasts that are out there that are providing that service are of value to people. It's just it's free and it's there anytime you want it. And if you want a boost of inspiration or education, and that's why I call my podcast Edspiration, is if you want a boost of that, like
Yeah,
you can always get it.
we're both inventing words. You got Edspiration. I went with Edgy Thoughts.
There you go. Well, we're innovators. What can we say?
Sure. People tell me it's a bad idea because you can't search it. No one's going to search that.
Yeah.
It's not a word.
Yeah. You know, a lot of words weren't words until they got popular, right? Ain't wasn't a word until people used it too much. So
right. Yeah, into the dictionary.
Yeah, right. And upstander, upstander is a word that I've used for years. It's now in the dictionary. Yeah. So, things evolve.
Absolutely. I like that thing you said about drinking from the hose. And I hear that from teachers, particularly about Twitter. And I end up talking about Twitter more than I feel like I should, but it's kind of like my base professional development and where I meet a lot of people and how I go. And one of the things that I've discovered is so tough about it is it doesn't really work right away. Right? It's not instant. Like when you join Twitter and you have 6 followers and your friend tells you, oh, you got to ask questions to Twitter and it'll help you out. And then you ask a question and no one responds because you have 6 followers.
Yeah.
You got to build a network, and it's kind of like you've got to sort of figure out how to use hashtags and figure out which ones interest you and where you want to go. So it takes a little while. You've got to really sort of believe in it before it gets to the point where it's useful. But things like finding that things like the podcast, like whether you're actively participating or whether you're just listening, it's kind of instant. Okay, I listened to that for half an hour and now I have a little bit more knowledge than I did before. It's voice, it's easy to digest. There's no hyperlinks and other things I have to learn how to decode. It just it's easier to drink from that hose.
Yeah. And I think that's the job that we have, and I think any buddy who's in professional development is to make it so it's I can't even say the word. Compartmentalized, so that we can do that sufficiently so that people feel like they can drink from that and it is something digestible and they can take it in a dosage in a short bites and then go use it, practice it, and come back for more when they're ready. And I think anybody who is in professional development who does it well, I think does that thing, bring something as a big subject, turns it into something that you can digest and you can take, and something practical is something useful and you can go and practice it right away. That to me is something that is a gift of good people in that professional development field.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Well,
I had Ian Baker on the other day. He's an interesting guy, and he's curating this stuff. And what he's trying to do is create, particularly for principals and administrators of school that are, so his words were, the walking the talk thing, and try to put them on one place and allow people to get to that. Which I thought was really interesting. That he was really pushing that if you're an administrator, so I'm a principal, so if you're an administrator and you're not using all of these tools, then you can't expect anyone else to use all these tools. The first thing where someone's going to say, principal asked them to do whatever. Principal asked them to join Twitter, and the principal's not on it. Like, well, if you don't have time to do it, how do I have time to do it?
Right. No, I think we have to model it. We have to walk the talk. And, there's a saying by Alvin Toffler that I really like. He says that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It's going to be those who cannot learn and unlearn and relearn. And I think that
learn, that's a great piece.
Yeah. And relearn. And I think that, as I said, professional development educators have to have that. And I think educators, we have to have that mindset, because so many are good at that. They have to unlearn ways of teaching and relearn, new math and different ways of instruction. That if we're really going to be evolving as a profession, as educators, we have to figure out how to unlearn and relearn. And that's an ongoing process. It's not something we can ever be static and stay that, oh, I've taught this way for 20 years. And in fact, they've taught the same thing 20 times, as they say. But it's really about how do we continually evolve and generate interest in a subject ourselves, so that we can continue to excite students. Because if we're not doing it, as you said, even as administrators using Twitter or saying, hey, we got to use social media, how do we educate students if we're not, and in some ways, aware of what those things are, even if we're not experts, but that we're at least aware of them and we can speak to them.
Right. And I like the use of evolution, because it is constantly changing, and it doesn't mean that what you did was wrong. It just might not be right for right now. And I've had that conversation with a few teachers, and I had one in my head that really, I think I've shared on the podcast before, when I was talking about a new technique, and she was pushing back pretty hard, and eventually said, look, you're right. This new technique is what I should do. But it makes me, if I agree with you, it makes me feel like what I've been doing was wrong.
I think that's a curse of many things that are occurring now in education, that we've gotten so much into the measurement and the standards, and that we're using data that we're not using the data to learn. Where too often the data is being used to beat people up, that, oh, the test scores are going this direction, so therefore what you're doing is wrong. And it's used to make people wrong and bad, and it's kind of a blame and shame game. And instead, data should be used, as I say, like a flashlight. It should be used to illuminate areas of strength and of weaknesses and of challenges, and to learn, to be a learner in the process of looking at data and saying, well, how do we use that information now to support student learning? How do we make what we do better? And that's it, like I said, an evolving process that we've got to continually be in, that just never stops. And it can be fun and it can be informative if we frame it that way.
Right. I really, really, really like data as a flashlight. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's just something I tell people, because I think it's too often used like a hammer, and it's beat people up. And I prefer to think of it as a flashlight. And that's something that we can just use to illuminate things. Because, it's just like every school I go into, every school, just like every person, has their strengths. Every school, like every person, has their weaknesses, and we all have our challenges. And I don't think schools are any different from people in that regard. And once we start to think we've got it, or that we can't do it, those are two things that I think are illnesses in that body. So I've got it and I can't do it are two of our greater challenges.
Right. I like the every school, as it has I was thinking about what you're saying there. Every school does have a sort of a character, right? When you walk in, and for someone like yourself who's walking into a whole bunch of different schools, that sort of must be pretty obvious every day. I mean, there's stuff that's always the same, but then there's stuff that's always different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's fascinating. Just walking in these schools, working with them for the days that I can work with them, just what I pick up on the cultures that each one has. And every school is just like every human being. They're all different. And I think that when we're just like every person, we got to look at what those strengths are and what are the things that we can do to change them, and to look at across different dimensions, not just about test scores, but about, safety. How safe do the kids feel? How safe physically? How safe socially and emotionally do they feel? And asking the people that are all parts of that body how their feelings are on those dimensions and how we're doing. I mean, you think about staff, of course we should ask. Students, of course we should ask. But what about the parents? What about support staff? What about community members? Could we ask community members what their perceptions are of a school, for example, that surround a school? Because they all contribute to that environment. And anyone that contributes to that climate should be part of that conversation. We can't just base it on, achievement alone. There's so many things that inform that climate.
Right.
Just like we can't
at the end of the race without looking at everything that happened before the end of the race.
Yes, right. And if I'm going to assess my own self, what are my gifts or talents or my knowledge, but not just my knowledge. What are my skills? What are my characteristics? What are my traits? What are my dispositions? What are the things that make me who I am? And looking at all those things, because if I'm just looking at the intellectual, that's only one score. And frankly, it's probably not my highest score. So, there's all these other parts of me that I think contribute to who I am as a person. And schools, I think, are the same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's an extension of community, right? I mean, if a school is working as it should be working, I mean, maybe even extension of community is not the right way to say it. It's a part of the community. Right. And I think sometimes schools can be seen as entities of teachers and students the parents send their kids away to, but of course they play a role. And even if they're not walking in the building, they still play a role. So making that connection makes a lot of sense. I've heard a lot of people talk about this idea of, let's say, technology, of having, cell phones in the school, or less paper or more paper. And I kind of appreciate the argument of, well, it should be a reflection or of the society that the kids are in, right? If you're walking out around the real world with a cell phone in your pocket, why are you not able to walk around in the classroom with a cell phone in your pocket? Like, isn't that where you should be learning how to use it?
Yeah, that brings up a lot of fascinating things, because there's so many schools who have different policies in that regard.
Right.
And there are some schools that utilize, as probably some of the guests you've talked to, have incorporated the technology into the classroom and into the learning. And if we're moving away from an old model of instruction where the teacher is the vessel and the keeper of all the knowledge and has to unload it and download it into kids' brains, to now we know that, in many ways, they don't need a teacher for that. Obviously, they can get any answer they want on Google it, watch YouTube videos about things. And it's really the role of the teacher then to help students process that stuff, not to be the holder of that knowledge. And I mean, there's a school today who had so much social media drama happening at lunch because kids were allowed to utilize their devices during lunch, and they weren't utilizing them responsibly. They were using them to take pictures of people, to spread rumors about people, to create social drama. And most of their discipline issues were happening right after lunch because of all the kids were in their devices, not with each other. And I think that they decided this year, you know what, we're just going to not allow kids to use them during lunch either. And you know what they found? All those problems went away, and all the drama that they had during lunch stopped. And so their way of operating is different from someone else's, and what works for them, and how they teach their kids how to be digital citizens in another case. So, every school is its own different entity, its own body. And I can tell you which schools I would rather be part of as a student. But I can also tell you ones that, well, if it's going to cause that much drama, how do we teach them to be socially responsible with it, so that they understand that they're creating a brand through their social media? And how do we help them manage their brand?
Well, I went through the cash the other day, and the 17-year-old clerk was texting while putting my groceries through, which personally I don't think is what you should be doing when you're on the job. It's my opinion.
Right.
But then I was thinking, okay, well, how would I deal with this? Would I, as an employer, I guess I could take away the phone. But like, wouldn't it be more sensical if that person had learned how to use their phone when they were learning these social skills earlier on?
Mm-hmm.
If they had that talk with their grade 8 or grade 5 teacher, who was explaining, okay, well, this is when you can, this is when you can't. Like, if they had that woven into their fabric of their education, then when they came out, could they not apply that to the job? Because the cell phone stuff's new. I didn't have one until my late, 30s.
Right. I think it's a great point, because just as we have to learn and unlearn things, we have to learn now, okay, social media and these devices are so much a part of the student learning and their student life and even their identity. I mean, that if you take that thing away from them, it's almost like you're taking away part of their soul. That is something they see as so connected to who they are. And if we're going to remove that from them, one possible solution, but another possible solution is, well, if it's going to be part of our society, and if we say we're preparing kids for the future, if we're really preparing kids for the future, we got to prepare them how to use those devices. So we've got to figure out other ways, I think, to go beyond just taking it away and finding ways to have them know how to use it in a way that's productive and to use it responsibly.
And so when you're talking about visiting these schools, predominantly you're looking at discussing school climate. That's the main goal.
Right. So school climate is it's connected to oftentimes around safety issues, around social and emotional safety for students, and having students, when you look at, for me, I look at climate as an umbrella or as a plate. There's certain things on the plate, like things we have to achieve: attendance. We have to get kids to go to school. We have to get kids to feel safe, and we have to have them achieve. And if we're improving the climate as a whole, all of those things get better. And the research shows that attendance goes up and achievement goes up, and all these things that we want to see in young people go up because the climate is improved. The social climate, the learning climate is improved in the entire school. And for me, one of the ways to access that climate is to talk about, how do kids feel in this school, physically, socially, emotionally? Do they feel safe? And oftentimes adults perceive that kids feel safer than they perceive. Like, their perceptions of safety are often they often feel much less safe than the adults think they do. And so
a child's definition of safety, it can often be a lot different, right? Like, I like that you're talking about, like, we're not talking about safety about whether or not they're going to be plucked out of the hallway. Right. The safety is, how do they feel socially, emotionally, right?
Yeah. Can I wear my shirt to school, wear a backpack to school, like my son bought the first day of the school, and he wore it to school proudly, he liked it, to 2 weeks later, a kid picking him on him for that backpack and saying it's stupid, you shouldn't wear it, to him coming home and saying, you know what, I need a different backpack. So, obviously he wears that backpack every day. He's conscious of that, for example. But that's just a backpack example. That's very simple. What about the skin color of a student? What about if they're, in a wheelchair or not? What about if there's someone who is good at sports versus not good at sports, raising their hand in class and getting the wrong answer and being made fun of because they were too stupid? Or they raise their hand and they get the right answer, they're being made fun of for being too smart. So, how do we get it so that kids feel they can have a sense of social safety and emotional safety so that they can really learn? Because if they're focused in on the drama, what happened at lunch with my Instagram page, if they're focused in on what somebody did pushing someone in the hallway, or someone saying, you better not talk to my girlfriend, you better stay away from my boyfriend, those things all contribute to that environment, to how safe they feel. And so most of my work involves having students not to learn how to be in a school so they don't have to be a bystander or a contributor to that mistreatment. I want kids who are socially and have the social capital to be able to stand up to that mistreatment. So I train students to give them de-escalation skills, another thing that every student should learn, that they should learn how to de-escalate conflicts and how to help people get along. And how do I reduce drama if someone's coming to me with a rumor? Or how do I help my friend if they're being made fun of, or they're being mistreated, or even threatened? How do I help people in a situation that are around me so that I don't have to be a bystander to that mistreatment, that I could be that upstander to that mistreatment?
Yeah, and what a lovely set of soft skills that is certainly worth talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, these are things that if we don't teach them, how are they going to learn them? I mean, they learn that the way I fit in is by either doing nothing or being socially cruel myself. Then I can get some acceptance if I can put that person down more, or if I can add more humor to that comment about this post about somebody on Instagram. Like, how I get social influence and how I get accepted, which is such a huge thing for young people as they go through adolescence. How do I become accepted and part of this community? Like, being kind is cool versus being cruel is cool.
Yeah. Okay, can I ask your opinion on something?
Mm-hmm.
I've been toying with this thing. Well, I've been noticing it happen. That it sort of used to be, and now it's almost all the way off, but it's certainly been shifting. It used to be that end of the day, you go home and kids would play with their neighborhood friends, and that would be that. And now there's social media. That's not the case, right? You continue to engage with the people that you engage most of the day with. So school. And it's like that climate that you're talking about doesn't turn off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So whether it be positive or whether it be negative, whatever it may be, it seems that school climate is 24/7, what it used to be Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
Free.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, bullying and mistreatment and harassment used to end when the school bell rang, or at least maybe you got dropped off at the bus stop if it happened on the
Yeah,
bus.
or almost after the school. Yeah.
Almost after. But now, like you said, it's 24 hours. There's no escape from it, especially if they have these devices, which makes that even more important to instruct students on the use of it.
Well, yeah, and as an administrator, like I can't get over it. I mean, you get conflict in the schoolyard and you're dealing with it, and 9 times out of 10 it's like it rooted from a conversation they had on social media that morning or like at night, or it's not new. It hadn't just happened. It's something that's been going for a while.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to something we were talking about earlier, which is that sometimes there's so much of that blame going around, like, oh, it's parents' responsibility to take care of that social media stuff or to help their kids. And, parents say, no, it's the school's responsibility to deal with that drama or to teach my kid. Everyone in that community, as you said, it's part of the community. Everyone's responsible for contributing to that. So how do we all play our individual role? How do I, as a parent, help my kid understand and stay on top of that stuff, recognizing that for me, sometimes parents it's like giving the keys to my car. And I say, here you go, go figure out how to drive that thing. And then you tell me and then you come back later and teach me how to do it. So oftentimes we give devices to kids in the same way. Here's a device, happy birthday, whatever you do with it, go do. And then, oh, I don't understand this, son, can you explain what this app is? It's so interesting how we feel like we give it to them and we can just walk away instead of staying engaged and being co-learners with them in that process.
Well, I guess it does. I feel like there's a uniqueness to that. Like if you follow that analogy, the car, like, I mean, it's not new technology.
No,
right? I know how to use a car better than you do because I'm older than you. Therefore, I've had a chance to. Mm-hmm. But everybody, whether you're 10 or whether you're 50, has the same amount of experience with Snapchat. All of us just showed up.
Right. But they use it a lot more than we do, right? I know that I barely use, but they use it every day, every hour sometimes. So they're obviously much better at it. And if they can teach us how to use it in a classroom, how do we apply this to learning? How do we utilize this in our classroom?
Right.
Then it's going to be something where we can be, we don't have to be the vessels of holding all the knowledge. And like, how do we learn from our students? And how do we make them, as you've heard from some of your other guests, to be student-centered? How do we really shift from teacher-directed to student-centered and get them to teach us, to show us, to teach each other? How do we create that kind of environment I think is a challenge that some educators are doing well and others not sure how to tackle.
Yeah, well, it's not easy, right?
No,
to do that.
no.
It's almost like it's completely against. Oh goodness, I don't get too angry with teachers' colleges, but like it's almost like it's completely against what you spend a year or two learning in teachers' college, right? They're spending all this time getting you ready to stand up in front of this pack of wolves, and you're gonna have to figure out how to manage yourself in front of them. And then I get this teacher coming to me straight after teachers' college. I'm like, no, it's okay. You can be wrong. That's all right.
Yeah,
you can be wrong, and embrace your kids and create an environment. Everyone's working together.
Well, you put your finger on something that I think is very important, is to look at how we are educating our teachers. How are we, and not just the veteran ones, how are we supporting and helping them unlearn and relearn, but how are we educating our future educators so that they're learning, how do I manage a classroom? How do I de-escalate conflicts myself? How do I address mistreatment that occurs in my midst without ignoring it? So all of those things, many people who are new to teaching tell me, I never heard this when I was in college. I spent 4 or 5 years learning, and I never heard how to manage a kid, how to connect to them, how to help them stay focused on their learning, how to de-escalate that drama. That never was any part of the conversation. So if you're looking at education, change, or we're trying to improve education, we've also really got to look at those systems which are teaching our future educators.
Yeah. And I was thinking recently I went to a Makerspace conference and trying to maker education. And so 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of talk about maker education and bringing in 3D printers and like all the different cool gadgets you can get. And what was kind of refreshing about this one is they were saying, okay, the gadgets are cool, but what's really interesting to us is like mindset teaching. What's the maker mindset, and how can we get kids to think about going about making and different challenges and that sort of thing. And I hear from student teachers, like you just said, that, well, I never heard that in college. No one ever taught me that. But I'm wondering if because we're still teaching teachers in a rote way instead of teaching teachers in a mindset way. Because no, you're not going to know about whatever new thing Google puts out because it hasn't happened yet. But if you have that mindset that you're able to adapt to it and able to create a climate where you can get your students involved together, then that will be more successful. Like, don't try to learn all the new stuff. Try to learn how to learn all the new stuff.
Right, right. No, I'm with you. And that's the gift of liberal arts education is often how do we teach people how to think? How do we teach them?
I never hear that. No one ever congratulates me on my philosophy degree. So.
Yeah, well, congratulations. Well, let me be the first, because really it's really about knowing how to compartmentalize and how to organize all of these different things and how do we put them in a way that we can communicate it to students or to other staff members. So it really is something about how do we teach them critical thinking skills, and how do we shift our teaching so that we're facilitators of education, not just downloaders of that education.
Right. Oh, I like that. Facilitators versus downloaders. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I kind of think of that when I do the training I do around violence prevention, when I do that training, or when I do training for staff, whether it's to teach them how to, de-escalate conflicts themselves. I kind of think of it as, I'm not here with all the knowledge, but I have some skills that I can offer. And I want to facilitate a conversation about how do we integrate those things into your instruction or into your personhood. And I know that we've got to balance. We've got to strike a balance between, giving content versus paying attention to process, for, being teacher, content driven, or versus doing process driven, or facilitating, or tapping into the emotions versus the head. So that balance we have to strike is delicate. And not every teacher is great at it, but I know some that are just amazing and they're gifted at that, and they're talented, and they also have the skill set to go with those talents. So I think that that's something that we have to pay attention to as educators when we're modeling it for students, or if I'm a professor in a department of education, am I modeling the facilitation of learning, or am I just trying to fill these empty vessels?
Right.
So,
no, an excellent point. I mean, the way that you're going to disseminate that information to a new teacher will most likely be the way that they're going to take that information and try to do it to the next person down the road.
Right. How am I modeling this instruction for people so that they can go model that way of delivering information themselves? I think that we have to hold that mirror up to ourselves. Am I going to be that professional development person who stands in front of my PowerPoint and reads them, and has 1,000 words on a slide, or am I going to model it in a different way so that they can learn from my instruction? And I think, we're always teaching in the manner of our instruction, not just the content that we deliver.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Well, I'm glad you agree.
I've been thinking about this year. I've been trying. So I send an email out most days, every second day, to my staff to give just updates of this is what's going on, and this is the field trip, and this is the whatever. And so I tried to make like a conscious effort this year to change the delivery method as often as possible. So I'll do an email. I did a screencast. I did a Powtoon. Just different things so that you can see that tool being used in a way that's meaningful to you. Like I could just as easily say at the bottom of my email, check out screencasts.
Yeah.
But I think it would be much more useful if they got that piece of information in that way.
That's great, because you're modifying the tool so that people who access it versus video versus people who are more interested in reading, it's the same thing as educators. We've got to provide it in different ways, the kinesthetic and the visual and all those different ways we can provide it. And I have people go to trainings and when I do my bullying prevention work. I have people notice, okay, well, we've got content. Yeah, we've got the book. We've also got the experience. We've got the emotional experience to go with it. And research says that kids are more likely to remember stuff when they're emotionally connected to it. So we've got an emotional component. We've also got the practice where we're doing role playing and demonstrating. And, so there's just like you're doing through your tools of communication, you're providing many different avenues in which people can access that, and people who are good communicators do that.
Excellent. So I think we're coming up to the end of our time. Is there anything else you want to touch on here before we wrap it up?
Well, I think that I want people to know how to connect with me on my Twitter, which is @SchoolClimates with an S, so they can connect with me on Twitter there. I'm on Facebook. If you search School Climates, you'll find me there as well. And the podcast is at edspiration.org, so they can go there and find those interviews and shows. And I would ask, as if I'm in administration or if I'm a teacher, my question that I often start out with asking people is, what kind of knowledge, what kind of skills, what kind of dispositions or characteristics do you want the child that's closest to you, what would you want them to have? So your own, if you have a son or a daughter, you have a niece or nephew, your students that you may be close to, if you had to ask what kind of skills, what kind of knowledge, what kind of dispositions would I want them to have when they leave my classroom? And asking ourselves that question, I think, is not something done enough, because we don't often ask, what does education mean to my kids? What kind of school, if I could create any kind of school, what kind of school would I create? What would it be like? And how do I start to move towards creating that school? And if we've got our vision and then we've got our current reality, we've got a gap. And so how do we start filling the gap? What are the actions we take? And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens intentionally. It happens through action planning. It happens through support often. So how do I start to bridge the gap? And I've always got the vision, but it's always about moving through that gap. And that's an ongoing process to create the school that I want to create. Because that's my commitment, is to have places where people love to learn, kids want to be there, they want to show up, and teachers love to teach. And if you're in that kind of space, man, I think you're as close to heaven on earth as you can get.
Well, they're out there. I mean, that's the important thing. Like, these spaces are there, and they can absolutely be created right across the board. Yes.
And my son, he's in 5th grade, and this is the first, I just tweeted something a little while ago. Yesterday he told me, Dad, if they didn't assign homework, I wouldn't hate school. And that just hurts my heart, because every year until this year, he said, I love school. I can't wait to go back. I miss my teacher. I miss my classmates. And as a parent, that's the thing that you want to hear from every kid that you have. And I think that that's something I want my kid to have back. And that he's not learning from a teacher right now that is, I think, directed in that same way, that she's focused in on content perhaps, and maybe on what she's got to achieve. And I can understand that every teacher's under that kind of pressure, but I also have to pay attention to the environment and the love of learning. And I think we have to continually strike that balance for kids and for ourselves. And do we love the teaching? Do they love the learning? And how do we stay in that space?
Agreed. And seeing that in our own kids is interesting.
Yeah.
My son's just going through the grade 1 thing, and seeing education from your own children entering is an often illuminating vision.
Yeah, right. Are we illuminating learning, or are we killing it? I mean, that's a question I think that in education systems, we've got to continually look at. Are we continuing to ignite learning, or are we doing something that we're just trying to measure things and assess things along the way, so much so that we're squeezing the joy of learning out and the joy of teaching out?
I tweeted, it might have been 4 years ago now, I remember doing it. I tweeted something about educators need to teach kids how to be inquisitive and excited about learning. And someone got me right away and said, no, we don't. We need to stop killing the inquisitive nature that they come in with.
Right, because they naturally have it. That's right.
They already know. They come in being inquisitive, being excited learners. Like, they're already there. They're pre-programmed.
Yes. Yeah.
You just have to not squeeze it out of them.
That's right. My way I operate from my starting point is educators are heroes and they want to do amazing things. They want to connect to their kids. They want to ignite that learning, but oftentimes they don't know how to keep that alive or how to sustain that. And I think that that's something that is some great educators, amazing educators are heroic, doing amazing things every day that never end up in the news, but they're things that are heroic. And I want to celebrate that. And I want to bring out the positives, and I want to know what people are doing that are the strengths. And I just like people to share that. And I think, frankly, homework is not one of them. And there's no research that shows that homework supports learning in elementary school. So if you're going to, kill the learning out of kids, homework is not the place, is a place to start if you want to do that in elementary school. But I prefer to ignite it rather than extinguish it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Derek. Thanks for inviting me. I look forward to continuing to listen to your podcast. So thank you.
And yours.
Thanks.
Cheers.